and it's getting darker and darker. So, yes. Another Wednesday night alive, and tonight we're blessed to have with us A Barron, and he says I can refer to him as TA when I'm referring to him as an author, but Tom when I'm referring to him as a human being.
They're two different things.
Before we move into Tom, I do want to thank Jeremy in the dark over there making the coffee. And I want to thank Ed and Chris for setting up the room today too, as far as coffee or the coffee and snacks. So thank you so much. One thing to know is that Tom will be going downstairs for confirmation, so I do want to be quick about my introduction. I won't be as quick tomorrow because I have so many things to say about him. But I just couldn't believe when I was picking Tom up at the airport because he has been a household, not as Tom though. I mean, it was almost like calling your kindergarten teacher by their first name. I'm like, I can't call you Tom. But because I've been reading these books with my kids since my 18-year-old was 7, and just finished the best book ever, The Eternal Flame with Daniel, like 4 months ago, I think. So, but I'm just excited that you guys have come out to meet the great A Barron, and as far as his masterful storytelling and his passion for the environment, for people living their life as story. And I'm just going to let you get to meet A Barron. Help me welcome him.
Thank you, Kelly. Thank you all. I have to say, being a wandering bard, which is kind of what I am, it hasn't changed much as a job description for several centuries. You know, in the old days, you'd walk from village to village with your burro, and maybe do some juggling, and perhaps people would offer you supper afterwards. Nowadays, it's the same thing, except you're with your carry-on baggage, and if you're really, really lucky, you land in a community like this one, where there's a wonderful church community and a great outreach and lots of activities. And seriously, this is very special what you are doing here, and I just want to really applaud you and thank you for welcoming random wandering bards into your midst. I came here from Boulder, Colorado, where I live, and at the drop of a hat, I will show you, as Kelly knows, a picture of my, or more than one, of my family with our 5 kids, all of whom are just wonderful people. But as I mentioned to Kelly, my only complaint is that they have just grown up too darn fast. But I am one of those lucky people who gets to tell stories and share them now all around the world, and I'm thrilled to be here in Omaha with you all. I'm gonna give you just a kind of a quick summation of a couple of the elements of my talk tomorrow night, but I'm going to save the really good stuff for tomorrow night. That's includes some lovely images of Colorado, and also a trailer of a couple of the books envisioned as movies and things like that. But I really want to say there's a lot that draws me into this realm of writing books, especially books that touch both children and adults. The part that touches children, I have to say, bright kids like Daniel, for example, is wonderful because it keeps you always guessing. It keeps you always humble. And those of you who are parents, you know exactly what I mean. I get wonderful letters and comments from kids from now all around the world. But the ones I appreciate the most, the ones that make me laugh, like the ones that say, "Dear A Barron, my teacher made me write to a living author. And so, if you are still alive, please answer these 5 questions so I don't flunk out of 5th grade." There was one I got last summer. I'm still chuckling about. A girl in California wrote to me and she said, Dear T.A. Barron, I came to the public library to hear you speak. My mom brought me because she knows I like your books, but really, that's not why I came. The real reason I came is that I have always wanted to write books myself, but I never thought I could do it until now. And now at this point, you know, all of you who are parents, teachers, or work with kids, you know that happy kind of goofy look we get on our faces when we feel like we've done the right thing by a young person. And I was feeling that way. I thought, I didn't know what it was I said, but something I had said had encouraged this young lass to do what was in her heart, and that's a good thing. And then I made a big mistake, which was I kept reading her letter. Remember, she said, I have always wanted to write books, but I never thought I could until now. Then she added, because now that I've heard you speak, I know for sure you really don't have to be very smart to write books. So I know, I'm hoping I know what she meant, but I'm not quite sure still. Anyway, put all that aside. Those are some of the comical reasons that I love writing where the readership includes bright young people. And also, by the way, if you believe the New York Times, the readership includes young people aged 9 to 99. And I kind of like that, although I feel sad about the 100-year-olds who got left out. But I really do write stories that I hope just cross all those boundaries of age and time. But I also want to write stories that are vehicles for big ideas. And for me, one of those very big ideas is that notion that Kelly referred to, that I often come back to, that life itself can be a story. Our lives can be a story. If we simply think of ourselves as the author of our own story, think of what power, what opportunities, what that opens up, what dreams to be fulfilled. It's a wonderful way in to that world. And so that's for that reason, it's no accident that I am drawn to heroes. I'm drawn to heroes in fiction and in nonfiction. The hero's journey as a basic idea that crosses all cultures, boundaries, and time in human experience is so marvelous and powerful and alluring and endlessly fun to deal with. And so my fiction always involves a person who really has no idea of themselves as a hero, but ultimately digs deep in a time of real crisis and pulls out those qualities that they would themselves never have guessed. Qualities like courage, or perseverance, or compassion when it's difficult, or all of the elements that really ultimately amount to trying to make your life as good a story as you can. For example, probably the stories that I'm most well known for are the ones that Kelly referred to, volume 11 out of a 12-book series. They're about the adventures of Merlin, that wonderful fellow who we all know as the mentor to King Arthur and the great mage of Camelot. But I wondered for a long time, what was he like before he became that great, wondrous wizard with all that wisdom and all that sensibility about humanity and our ability both to do terrible, awful, tragic things and ultimately to pick ourselves up and reach for the stars and do really beautiful, wonderful things. Merlin really had that full sense of humanity. Otherwise, how could he be that great mentor to young King Arthur? And the question I kept on wondering about was, how did he get there? What made it possible for him to be that wizard? So I started writing his story before all of that great power and wizardry and majesty came about. Where does it begin? It doesn't start with a wizard. It starts with a boy who is half drowned, barely alive, who washes ashore on this dark and mysterious coastline. He's spat out by the sea. He hits his head on some rocks, and when he comes to, the seagulls are screeching. You can imagine that kind of a moment. Even then, by the way, the waves are pulling at his torn tunic as if they want to drag him under the waves and drown him. And with all of his strength, he musters all of his strength, and he crawls a little bit higher up on the shore, and he sits up. And his mouth is full of sand, and he barfs seawater. He feels weak, and his head is spinning, but something happens. He realizes two things. First, that he survived some sort of a terrible shipwreck somehow. And second, he realizes that he has lost all of his memory, every last bit of it. So he has no idea at all who he is, or where he came from, or who his parents were, where he grew up. None of that. He has no idea. And I would understand it if you looked at that boy, that half-drowned wretch of a boy on the beach that day, and said, well, he has nothing. But that wouldn't be true. Because, in fact, even though he doesn't know it himself, he has something. He has a spark down inside. A spark, call it the spark of a hero. Something down inside that if he can just survive that day, and by the way, the worst is yet to come. If he survives that day and the years to come and grows to become the great wizard Merlin, that spark will grow into a flame, into a bonfire so big that it's going to burn down through the centuries. As the wizard we have celebrated now for almost 1,500 years told stories about, the fellow we call Merlin. So that gives you a sense of where I come into stories. It's really about the character. It's about those inner qualities. And now, because I know we're almost out of time, and Kelly's going to throw a net over me in just a minute, I'm actually going to transition to a book that's maybe my littlest book, but it's actually probably my most adult book. And this is a book called The Wisdom of Merlin that just came out last spring. It's a gift book that is really just an imaginary conversation with the wizard Merlin. And you can tell, after 12 books and a movie script and all this stuff about Merlin over the years, I really have come to be able to pretty much hear his voice. And it's a wonderful thing. When you hear the voice of a character is when they really come alive. And I realized, okay, there are some things I would like to say, but I don't want to say it myself. I think I'm going to ask Merlin to say it. So this is an imaginary conversation with Merlin when you walk into his crystal cave and ask him, okay, I have a question. And he said, okay, go ahead, ask any question you want. And you say, well, I have just a small little question. What is the meaning of life? And the wizard Merlin thinks a moment, and then he replies, well, that won't be hard, because the answer has just 7 words. And each of those 7 words is a chapter in this little book. One of those words I'd like to read to you now is the word courage. And to do that, I need to have the courage to put on my glasses. There we go. I should say the very first word in this book is gratitude. And the last word I will leave for you to discover yourselves. This is the word courage. Courage is essential. How can we dream of what the world can become and what we want for it? It takes courage to do that. It takes courage to turn our dreams into reality. You see, life can have great meaning, but only if we discover that meaning for ourselves. Meaning can't be bought at any store, and it can't be handed down like a coat that someone tells you will fit perfectly before you've even tried it on. Meaning must be sought and earned and made one's own, all of which requires courage. Have you ever stopped to wonder why we have free will to make our own choices? Some wise and gracious, some just plain foolish, some catastrophically bad? Because our choices matter. They define who we are, what values we live by, and what aspirations we honor. And if our choices matter, then we ourselves matter. Think of your life as a story of which you are the author. Using whatever materials you have and whatever inspiration you find, make it a story that truly belongs to you. Tell it truly, tell it passionately, and make it the very best story you can. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, tomorrow we'll share a bunch of stories, fictional and non-fictional. I think you may know I've been running now for 15 years a prize for heroic kids from all around America, and that's been a great constant source of inspiration. And I'll tell you a little bit about those kids tomorrow as well. So thank you for welcoming me. Thank you for doing all that you do in the community here, and hope to see you again tomorrow night.
We do have time for a few questions if you have any questions for Tom. Yes?
I just spent a week with my grandsons, and it was wonderful, 12 and 14.
Oh, great.
And they're both great readers, and every time we've gone before, there's a lot of reading. The 14-year-old got a cell phone for his birthday, and and they seem different now. Do you have any hints or tips on how do we get them to
Put the devices down.
away, and
Yes.
the TV and the video games?
I completely understand the problem, and I'm so glad you asked, because this is an issue that has really affected this current generation. And having raised now these 5 beautiful kids in the midst of that, we had to learn by doing. But 2 things I'll give you. I don't have perfect answers, but I know what has helped us. Number 1 is you have to set rules in the house. And to me, there are 2 really, really important ones. One is never, ever, under any circumstance, are any devices allowed at the dinner table, period. That's really important, because that's the only way you have a chance for genuine conversation at a meal. And the second one is to limit device time to when other things are done, when homework is done, when the dishes are washed, you have to set your own family rules, but we would allow the kids a couple of hours on weekends that but we never, by the way, allowed television, just roaming on television, because there's just so much bad stuff. In fact, part of why I'm interested in heroes is, to be honest with you, it's that we are really, I think, very confused as a society about what's the difference between a hero and a celebrity. And you think about the messages we're giving our children about that, in terms of how much airtime, how much visibility they get for whoever Kim Kardashian is dating these days, gets so much more airtime than somebody who does a really humble and courageous thing. Not to get any fame, but to do the right thing, like all of you do every single day. And we need to change that dynamic for our kids. And I think one of the ways we can do that, because devices are driven by commercial desire to sell things, and that means media is drawn to the superficial and the celebrity elements of things, which can be fun, but really has to be contained. And I think the only thing that parents can do is to draw the lines, to have some limits. And I really feel strongly about that mealtime one. That dinner table time, I would banish the devices. You know, they cannot be at the dinner table. No television, no cell phones. And then you have a chance. And the other thing that we did is to really be very active in other forms of storytelling and communication. We would read aloud to our kids a lot. We'd go climb into the tree house and bring up a couple big pizzas and have a pizza reading party. We would carve pumpkins together. We would share stories all over the place. We would make up our own operas. We even had a little puppet theater where the kids would do these crazy puppet shows, and we'd stop everything so that it basically opened the doors to kids' creativity. You know, a big costume box really helps, just with old clothes and hats and stuff like that. It just giving kids an opportunity to be their own creative force and not just depend on what is coming over the device. That's really helpful too. Because it's so powerful, they'll remember it. They'll remember when the mom read to them a book and it was a really special experience for both of you. They'll remember that their whole lives. I know I remember those times. And our kids very much like that. So that's what helps. Hope that's helpful to you. It's a good question. Yes, sir.
What truth lies in fantasy?
What a wonderful question. What truth lies in fantasy? Now, by the sound of it, that question would sound like a paradox, right? It would sound like that's not a possibility, but in fact, I think the best fantasy is true. And let me explain. The best fantasy, that means the use of metaphor and imagery to create a vehicle to tell a story in a really compelling way that's out of the boundaries, out of the rules of our everyday normal life. When you do that and you do it well, fantasy that really stays with us, and I'm talking about great stories of all kinds and all traditions, whether it's The Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien, or the fabulous Greek myths, or the enduring tales that Native American peoples would share together around the fire. Any tradition's greatest stories, you think of the wonderful tales in the Old Testament, there's elements of fantasy in that there's imagination. When Isaiah rides off into the sky in a chariot of fire drawn by horses of fire, have you ever imagined a better way to envision going from earth to heaven than that? But it's really so the best fantasy is use of metaphor that's still true on the levels of the human heart, what really feels true to life and our experience as human beings. Also that feels true to our senses. If it's well told, you can smell it, you can feel it. If you had a sense of what that boy felt who washed ashore, and that briny breeze off the sea that he was inhaling, then you were there into the story, and it would mean more. And I think best of all, fantasy, if it's told well, deals with these deeper ideas, ideas that are, to me, honestly, mostly questions. Questions like, can one person really make a difference? Or do our choices really matter? or how and in what ways are all people of all times connected to each other? Questions like that. If a story is true on all those levels, the heart, the senses, and some of those deep, wonderful, profound questions we all ask, then it's going to reach people and it's going to stand the test of time. That's the way fantasy ought to be true. Thank you for asking. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
So now that you've developed this character of Merlin in your head, you mentioned that it was very easy to have a conversation with him. So in writing the new book, did any of his answers surprise you?
Absolutely. Merlin, let me just say, I say that now I have his voice in my head, but I've been writing about him now for, excuse me, more than 20 years. So it took a while, and he's a tough taskmaster, this fellow Merlin. When I signed up to be his scribe, to tell the story of his youth, which is part of how it felt, I didn't quite know what I was in for. And I'll give you a couple quick examples. First of all, when I envisioned that boy washing ashore, it actually was when I was starting to work around ideas, but that idea came to me in a dream. I actually woke up and it was like a nightmare. I was really upset about that boy. Who was he? And then I realized, oh my God, he's Merlin, and that helped me know I was walking into that dark, long alleyway into the world of the imagination at that point. But I also really still didn't know him. I knew the elder Merlin from all those stories, and I loved The Once and Future King by T.H. White and all those great tales. But I had no idea, because nobody had written about him as a youth, what he was really like. So I started just writing the story, just kind of imagining it and trying out different outlines. I had about 4 or 5 different outlines. I did a biographical sketch of Merlin to try and get into it more, and then finally I had a draft that was written about his story that became book 1 in the Merlin saga, but it was written in the third person. It was that boy washed ashore, and that boy almost drowned. And I just knew that because this was the most personal story that the great wizard Merlin could ever tell, the secret story of his lost youth, it had to be told by him. So it had to be in the first person. And it took me actually another 2 drafts. It was the 4th draft before I felt comfortable enough. I could write it, I washed ashore. I felt so weak and confused and lost and alone. I had no memory. And then I realized. And all of the rest. So the adventures that happen in those books are told in the first person. It's about Merlin's sitting across from you right here in this cafe, with a mug of coffee in his hand, and you're sitting there with your steaming drinks, and he said, "Let me tell you how this all began. Long before there was a round table, long before there was a sword named Excalibur, long before all of that, I washed ashore." And that's when it starts to really happen. One last thing on this. Part of the mystery of how this happens, and even after 30 years of this, I still don't know how it actually happens, is that both sides of your brain get cooking in a story process. You have to have that logical side. That's why truth is important. You have to have that logical side. Does this make sense to an intelligent reader? Would this make sense? Does the growth of a character really feel true? Does what that character act like feel like that person's acting with integrity? Does Don Quixote do what he's supposed to do? And all of those. Whoop, oh well. I may have just. That's my signal to stop. You have to get the logic right, but you then open the doorway to that wonderful, magical world of metaphor. The world where dreams come from, the world where great poetry comes from, and that's the part I really love. But you have to somehow embrace both if you're going to tell a story that really has that ability to stand. You know what? I'd like to finish with one thing that I almost never do. Do we have time just for one last little teeny thing? I'd actually like to show you all something that I wear every day when I am out on a book tour. It's a little emblem of an oak tree that is handmade, and it's the Tree of Life emblem. And it was given to me when I was on a book tour about 10 years ago by a man in Germany who was a craftsman, a woodworker, metal worker, and he just brought this up, you know, after I'd done a presentation at the Frankfurt Book Fair, and he was a little comical actually at first, because the man had so much metal on him that he had made. You know, he had metal bracelets, he had metal necklaces and rings and a couple big earrings, and I was afraid if there was a lightning strike 10 miles away, it would ricochet and get him, because he was just loaded with, but he was wearing his art, you know, but he came up and he said, he took one of the necklaces, this one, that was on his neck, and he said, "Mr. Barron, I just want you to know that the stories you've been telling reach people in faraway places, people like me, you will never meet or know or hear from again, but I just want you to know that stories really matter, and you reach people of every possible description, and I would like you to have this as a thank you." And so he took it off of his head, put it over mine, and he turned around and walked off. And that's the, you know, last I ever heard of him. But I wear it because it's such a deeply humbling thing to be part of this world of storytelling and sharing ideas and images, and just be, you know, part of this wonderful community that you're all equally part of too. We're all creating these stories. And it's really a reminder to me when it's hard to get up in the morning to write that next chapter, that, you know, it just might matter to that fellow out in Germany or some other people in other lands. So that's why I do it. Thank you all for having me here today.